physical or chemical agents like radiation, cold, heat, and microwaves, which can cause detrimental effect on being exposed to living organisms, are called as toxic agents. The degree to which such an agent can harm an organism is called its toxicity. Toxicity refers to the effect a toxic agent has on the entire organism, organs, and substructure included. Effect on cell is called cytotoxicity, and effect on an organ like the liver is called hepatotoxicity. There are three kinds of toxic entities. Chemical. These are inorganic substances like mercury, lead, chlorine gas, hydrofluoric acid, and organic substances like methyl alcohol, poisons from living things, and sometimes medications. Biological. These include viruses and bacteria which are capable of inducing diseases into living organisms. These cause infections. Its toxicity is not easily measured because its threshold dose could be a single organism. Physical. These are such substances like asbestos fiber, coal dust, and fine silicon dioxide, fatal when inhaled, which interfere with biological processes in organisms due to their physical nature. A collective set of behavioral and physiological signs that indicate some kind of harmful biological reaction or response is termed as a mode of action. It is not a biochemical response, hence, mechanism of action should not be mixed with this. Modes of action are significant as they help in classifying pollutants or toxicants on their basis of toxic action. There are two kinds of modes of action. Specific. Toxicants that modify biological processes at low concentrations by binding to a certain molecule or to a certain site are a good form of specific mode of action. Non-specific. Toxicants that result in narcosis are a good example of non-specific mode of action. Ecotoxicology and mode of action. Pesticides. In comparison to the common research attitude in the elementary sciences, environmental sciences are habitually goal-driven and provide the scientific basis for cleanup procedures, risk assessment, as well as precautionary measures. They also provide a decisive support for management and policy. The goal of ecotoxicology is making us aware of the modes of toxic action and also their underlying biochemical mechanisms. It critically discusses the application of available knowledge in ecotoxicological threat evaluation. The study of the effects that toxic chemicals have upon biological organisms is termed as ecotoxicology. The effects on community, population, and ecosystem level are studied especially. It is a multidisciplinary field that integrates ecology and toxicology. The crucial goal of ecotoxicology is data sufficiency that will help us be able to predict effects of pollution. This will help us in coming up with effective and efficient ways to avoid any identifiable harmful effects. Victimized ecosystems are also studied in ecotoxicology to find solutions so as to restore them. The main role of systematic studies in ecotoxicology is not only to realize the influence of contaminants on living organisms, but also to come up with common principles for the classification and evaluation of such effects. The former incorporates results of emphases across all levels in a biological organization, right from molecular to ecosystems, but the latter mainly stresses on effects at individual levels. Effects and modes of action. Toxicants are found in nature itself partially, while the rest is introduced by humans. While it might be present in one site, yet it spreads into different sites through interactions between species, ecosystems, and lastly, sites. These toxins travel through organisms in food chains, spread through air and water, etc. These are the two most common methods of scattering known to man. However, apart from these, there are other lesser known means too. Toxic chemicals introduce the risk of cutting off animals' food source, which could affect the population of the prey. Species are pushed to the edge of extinction as they are linked with each other through the food chain. For example, due to the contamination by toxins of habitats of fish and some smaller birds, ospreys, falcons, and bald eagles were threatened with extinction. Humans are also easily affected. Plants absorb pesticides and other toxins from the soil through roots and from the air through leaves. We consume these plants containing toxins directly or indirectly by consuming animals, which in turn have consumed these plants. The toxins spread throughout the food chain, however, their concentrations vary, being higher in the lower levels and lower in the higher levels. Knowing about the whole procedure or the mode of toxic action is very essential for evolving predictive and descriptive models in ecotoxicology. It describes the crucial role of various mechanisms, presence of toxins in food chains, their movement through the food web, target sites and interactions with other target sites, and mechanisms for effective as well as efficient ecotoxicological risk assessment. Toxicology of metals and mode of action. The toxic effects of particular metals in certain doses and forms on the life of living organisms are termed as metal toxicity. Some such metals are not inherently poisonous but become so after forming soluble compounds. While some specific metals have no biological role, they are not important minerals, neither are they toxic in specific forms. Minerals like lead can have detrimental effects on health in any amount whatsoever. While there is a general conception of heavy metals being the poisonous ones, so lighter metals are also in the club. Beryllium can be toxic in certain circumstances. However, not all heavy metals are toxic. Some of them are even essential, like iron. When any metal is considered in such high doses as is considered abnormal, then it is called trace element. Sometimes, toxic metals imitate the properties and action of some essential elements required for our body, such that it interferes with the internal metabolic process, which eventually results in illnesses. As mentioned, some heavy metals like bismuth is far from being so, as it has low toxicity. Very often, toxic metals consist of mercury, lead, cadmium, and radioactive metal. Toxicity is related to solubility. Metallic forms as well as insoluble compounds display very little toxicity. A metal's toxicity depends upon its ligands. Effects and mode of action. Trace elements enter animal and plant systems with the help of their chemical properties like oxidation and reduction reactions in the presence of physiological conditions. While these reactions make some of the aforementioned trace elements essential for life, they are also the main reason for their toxicity. Metals are not created by humans, and that is how they differ from xenobiotics and other toxic substances. They happen to occur naturally. The actions of metals are physiological and biochemical mechanisms by which chemicals produce responses within living organisms. These actions affect a toxic action. Toxic metals bioaccumulate in the body of living organisms and the food chain as well. The chronic nature of toxicity of toxic metals is a common characteristic. This phenomenon is mostly and prominently notable in heavy radioactive metals like radium. It imitates the functions of calcium such that it is easily incorporated within humans in their bones. Similar implications on health are noticed when poisoned with mercury or lead. A few exceptions to this are aluminium and barium that are easily removed from the kidney. Organic toxins can be easily removed from the body or rendered harmless or destroyed. However, the same cannot be said for toxic metals. Their decontamination is tedious and sometimes impossible as they are present in elemental form, hence mostly indestructible. Sometimes they are insoluble or are in the accumulated form, which is achieved with the aid of chelating agents. However, they are diluted into large reservoirs like the sea and ocean because toxicity is not a function of amount but rather of concentration. Although there is very little the common man can do to avoid the ingestion of such toxic metals, precaution in choosing habitat and food can be a start. Toxicology of solvents and mode of action. The solvents we know of are a heterogeneous group of a few thousand of chemical compounds that can dissolve in water or dissolve other chemicals in themselves. This property makes them immensely useful in industrial and home settings for a number of purposes. Mostly its uses include cleaning and degreasing. Nearly hundreds of them have made their mark as useful in commercial products, mostly as degreasing agents in industrial sites. Water happens to be the most common solvent, and a number of such solvents are water-based. Organic or non-water-based solvents include lipophilic and hydrocarbon-based and consequently are able to dissolve, extract or suspend oils, fats and waxes. Generally, solvents are one of the few most underrated toxins presently known to man. They are more common in our daily lives than we notice or give thought. From being dissolved in oils, varnishes, and resins to be used as removals of paints, lacquer, and varnish. They are also present in solutions that are used to clean tools, toothbrushes, silk screens, as well as hands. As a result of their ingestion into our daily lives, we constantly come in contact with them knowingly or unknowingly. Effects and mode of action. A number of volatile solvents which are organic have such behavioral effects that range from being insidiously toxic to being beneficial. However, almost all organic solvents are toxic when inhaled or swallowed in certain quantities. Dermatitis is an effect of our skin being exposed to such harmful solvents. Each solvent have their unique physiochemical properties but are adept at impairing performance of the host with which it comes in contact or on which it is applied depending on concentrations. Neurotoxic effects are observed on prolonged exposure to such toxins. Some of them display noxious properties. When administered in high concentration, the effects are narcotic like dizziness, fatigue, nausea, coma, loss of coordination, and long-term exposure also leads to brain damage. Solvents like aromatic, aliphatic, and chlorinated hydrocarbons are so harmful that they should not be used. Other solvents like ethanol and acetone are comparatively safer. Solvents tend to trigger the stress axis, as a result of which humans' nervous system are easily implicated. Therefore, the neuroendocrine effects require further characterization. If these toxic solvents are used in pesticides and insecticides, then they start settling in living organisms through plants, which take them through roots and leaves from the soil and air respectively. These are then transferred through the food chain to other organisms higher up the levels, although their concentrations vary. Others are brought about by the industrial waste that are heavily laden with toxic solvents and are dispensed into water bodies. Since the water bodies are large, seas and oceans, the toxic concentrations are reduced. However, this would not be the case if the volume of waste is large. The aquatic organism community takes in these toxins that are dissolved in their surrounding habitat. These are then consumed by birds and animals like pelicans and bears, which are in turn consumed by other superior carnivores and omnivores such as lions, tigers, jackals, vultures, etc. This is how the route is made for toxic solvents to settle within living organisms. Radiation as a toxic agent and mode of action. When electromagnetic waves travel through matter containing media or through a vacuum for that matter, then the entire process is called radiation. Several kinds of subatomic particles like gamma rays, alpha particles, and electrons that travel through space at tremendously high speeds constitute radiation. Traveling at speeds of almost 1 lakh miles per second, these can easily penetrate into the human body. This causes damage to the biological cells which make up the body structure. Such damage causes genetic defects and cancer, which also harm future offspring. Effects and mode of action. Death. Exposure to very high levels of radiation frequently leads to death within a few weeks and sometimes within days. Cancer. People exposed to radiation are often diagnosed with cancer. Within the past 25 years, the risk has increased. DNA damage. Radiation causes cell mutation, random cell division, and even cell suicide. Internal damage. It causes respiratory failure, inflammation of the sac near the heart, vision impairment, damage of nerve cells, hair loss, loss of white blood cells, etc., due to exposure to radiation. Birth and genetic defects. It causes genetic makeup to be altered as an effect of exposure and also leads to the development of cancerous cells. Other effects include mental retardation, abnormal growth, poor development of eyes, small head, etc. Poor immunity. Disruption of blood cells, inflamed cells, poor functioning of liver, poor quality of muscle as well as fluid imbalances leads to poor immunity. Teratogenic effects. Effects on fetus due to exposure to radiation of mother is called teratogenic effects. Their effects include abnormal position of organs, abnormal organ size and short stature. This causes severe birth defects and sometimes leads to the death of the baby. Radiation poisoning. During the after effects of explosions of nuclear bombs or radiation leaks from industrial sites cause damages to the bodies of living organisms. Behavioral and psychological effects. Neurotic symptoms in survivors of atomic explosions. Other results are fatigue, lack of concentration, and amnesia, which are generally related to the autonomic nerve imbalance. Nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Small doses of radiation causes such damages and malfunctions to the body. Radiation toxic agents spread through nuclear bomb explosion, traveling through air, water, and soil. The entire area gets contaminated. Other sources are tank seepages of industries that use radioactive materials, malfunctioning nuclear plants, radioactive materials spilling out of trucks carrying them due to accidents. Diagnostic X-rays, CT scans, dental scans, and even whole body scans can cause exposure to radiation. Now, once these radiation toxins are settled inside the human body, it sets about damaging the internal system bit by bit very slowly. The contaminants are not easily eliminated and passed on to future offspring, causing damage in their system too. Out of all the toxins discussed above, this happens to be the most dangerous as it is hard to eliminate. Its remedies are also painful and costly, and once exposed to it, it not only affects the individual but also keeps damaging its future generations. Hence, the only best solution is to maintain precautions. Poisons, carcinogens, and others as toxic agents and mode of action. Substances that tend to cause disturbances in organisms are called poisons. The instabilities and effects come into play generally through chemical reaction or other activities on the molecular composition. When the organism has consumed a sufficient amount, it is then that he is affected. Poison and toxins are different according to zoology. Poisons that are produced by certain biological functions in the nature are termed as toxins, whereas the venom of certain plants and animals like snakes, scorpions, etc. also show poisonous characteristics. They are basically toxins produced by other living organisms. Sometimes, and this is rare, poisons are applied in agriculture, industry, and for other reasons than their toxicity. Pesticides are also one of the applications where they are used for their toxicity. There are two kinds of poisoning. Acute poisoning. This happens when there is exposure to any kind of poison for a short period of time. Chronic poisoning. This happens when there is exposure to any kind of poison for a long period of time. This makes a person weak and sick gradually. This is generally caused by poisons like lead and mercury that bioaccumulate. Applications. They are used as chemical reagents in agriculture, industry, etc. Poisonous gases were used earlier in gas chambers. Capital punishment in many countries was carried out by administering poisonous injections. They are used as chemical weapons. Also used as solvents. Incorporated in insecticides, pesticides, and rodenticides. Also used as herbicides and weedicides. Effects and mode of action. Absorption or sometimes even coming in contact with poisons lead to impairment or rapid death in some cases. Certain poisons that attack the nervous system paralyze within seconds of absorption. Poisons such as cyanide diminishes energy of the body by slowing down enzymes. Absorption of potassium chloride causes the heart to stop immediately by cutting out the cell potential required for muscle contraction. Sometimes, poisons help certain species thrive by eliminating other species that pose a threat to the survival of the former. Now, these chemical poisons, carcinogens, as well as radioactive poisons are spread in nature around us mainly through man-made methods. Due to the use of poisons in chemical warfare, such gases are released into the air, water, and surroundings. Apart from this, administering poisons in convicts facing capital punishment also ultimately goes back to the environment after their decay. Same is the case with insecticides, pesticides, rodenticides, weedicides, and herbicides. All these materials are poisonous and eventually settle in the ground or seep into the groundwater, which is in turn consumed by us in various concentrations that are generally not harmful, yet the balance might topple anytime. Other poisons from industrial solvents, chemical reagents, and radioactive materials are found in water bodies such as oceans, as the waste from factories and industrial sites end there. From there, the poisons affect the aquatic life and organisms. They are also found in such sites where chemical weaponry has been tested or used, or in agricultural areas where a lot of pest and weed control sprays are used. Conclusion. There are three types of toxins. These are physical, chemical, and biological. The physical toxins are dangerous when inhaled like asbestos fiber, coal dust, etc. And the chemical toxins are dangerous chemicals like chlorine gas, mercury, lead, etc. that are very poisonous for living beings and are sometimes also used in small doses in medication. Last but not the least, biological toxins are found within living organisms, for example, snakes, scorpions, bees, etc. All the aforementioned forms of toxins find their way into the internal systems of living beings by settling themselves from the site of their occurrence to the internal systems of the organisms present in that site. From there, it rises up the levels of the food web, thus reaching up to the topmost level. There are two kinds of mode of action, specific and non-specific. The specific mode of action defines toxins that modify biological processes by binding with a certain site or organism. The non-specific mode of action is the one that results in narcosis. The effects of toxins are many and mostly harmful. They affect the nervous system, cause brain damage as well as skin damage, and some even affect the heart rate. Eyes lose their strength on exposure to some toxins, while others cause stunted growth, gene mutation, slow brain development, and body structure problems. Apart from being thus harmful, toxins are also applied in agriculture, industry, law enforcement, medicine, as well as warfare. From herbicides to weedicides to solvents and chemical reagents, they have served mankind despite their formidable reputation. From curing deadly diseases like cancer to causing them, their effects elude logic. Toxins are a widespread field of study and it is necessary for the betterment of mankind.